Welcome to this panel under the heading Making Peace with Nature and Making Nature a Key for Peace. My name is Montserrat. I am Professor of Public International Law at Carlos III University in Madrid and currently Vice-Chancellor and co-director of the ICEL International Secretariat. ICEL is the International Council of Environmental Law. It's an NGO, the first NGO created by Jurist, specialized on environmental law. I am very sorry that Professor Robinson, who is the current executive president of this organization, was not able to be here today as initially planned. He was going to chair this panel, but it has been impossible for him. Anyway, it is a great honor for me to be here with you today. And I would like to thank the organizers for their extraordinary work for making this event reality, especially to Javier Cremades, Diego Solana, and all the sponsors as well. Well, I'm going to introduce the speakers who are going to present today, respecting the same order as it appears in the program. First, to my right, Mr. Daniel Zavala, Minister-Counsellor of the Costa Rica Permanent Mission to the UN. Second, Mr. Victor Tafur. He is the Chief Administration Officer of ICEL, and he is also the UN, the ICEL's representative before the United Nations, and Adjunct Professor at Pace University, and founder partner of the law firm with his same name. To my right, to my left, Dr. Teresa Parejo. She is the Sustainability and Corporate Social Responsibility Director of IBERIA. Also, she is Doctor in Administrative Law and the co-director of the International Council of Environmental Law Secretariat. And Kevin Chad, Mr. Kevin Chad is legal advisor at the Permanent Mission of Vanuatu to the United Nations. And finally, Mr. Scott Mahoney. He is the General Counsel and Corporate Secretary of Avangrid, a member of the IBERIA group. Well, welcome everyone, and as you can see, there are very relevant actors represented at this table. States, through their diplomats, civil society also with a representative, and enterprises. We could miss a representative from international governmental NGO, not NGOs, governmental organizations, but it is important to highlight that some of them, in particular the state's representatives and the NGO representative, work very closely with the most emblematic intergovernmental organization, which is the universal level, the United Nations. Well, the dynamic could be the following. I could ask 2 rounds of questions to the speakers, and after the 2 members of the audience could pose any question. I hope that that we could have an opportunity to have an spontaneous and fluid conversation among us. And so thank you very much. Well, I think that this same is happening in other rooms, as we have seen. And well, this is a new opportunity to interact together. Well, as an introduction, I can say that Making Peace with Nature is the evocative title of a report which was launched by UNEP in 2021. Is a scientific blueprint to tackle the triple planetary crisis of climate change, biodiversity, and pollution. And, well, you know that the United Nations Secretary-General has been insisting on this eloquent leitmotif, this message that we have to make peace with nature, and this is the defining task of our century. And, the environmental challenges have grown since 1972, when the first summit on environmental law took place. And, this is the era of the Anthropocene, and we should focus on a set of, in particular, some priorities. First, environmental changes undermine practically every kind of progress. It is impossible to fight against poverty, inequality. Even some of the sustainable development goals are at stake, as, for instance, the goal of getting inclusive and peaceful societies. And also, it is necessary to to recognize that the well-being of today's youth and future generations is also at stake. And the Earth environmental emergencies and human well-being need to be addressed together. Otherwise, it would be impossible to achieve sustainability. And, that also it is necessary to take into account that the economic, financial, and productive systems can and should be transformed. And finally, that everyone has a role to play. Everyone, not only states, intergovernmental organizations, corporations, but also civil society and individuals as such. So this is the first part of the making peace with nature, but there is another side of the coin, which is making nature a key for peace. And this is underdeveloped. This is not well known, and this could be a multifaceted sphere. With the new human right to a healthy environment and new developments could be expanded. It is necessary to take into account that there is a nexus between environment, climate, security, peace, and conflicts, which is more and more evident. And, the climate is also considered here as a threat multiplier, causing food disruption, migration, erosion of coastal countries, etc. In particular, the microstates, insular microstates, which haven't contributed to the creation of this state of emergency regarding climate, are suffering some of the most damaging effects, and its own survival is under threat. That's why Vanuatu led a very successful coalition, an international coalition composed by 132 states, asking to the General Assembly for a request to the International Court of Justice and after other international tribunals for an advisory opinion regarding the obligations of the states regarding climate change. So, Mr. Chan, can you describe the state of the requests of advisory opinions on climate change from its the International Tribunal of the Law of the Sea and the International Court of Justice, and what they mean for climate action and the protection of the environment?
Sure. Hi, everyone. So, yes, I think it's a very exciting time in international law at the moment. We have 3 advisory opinions requested from 3 different courts. Chile and Colombia requested an advisory opinion from the Inter-America Court of Human Rights on climate change and human rights. The Commission of Small Island States, led by the countries Antigua and Barbuda and Tuvalu, together with a group of other states, including Vanuatu, through the Commission of Small Island States, requested an advisory opinion from the International Tribunal of the Law of the Sea, touching on climate change and how it impacts the marine environment. And then Vanuatu, together with 17 other countries, including Costa Rica, led the negotiation and formulation of a draft resolution at the UN that put the request to the ICJ on certain questions. So these 3 are occurring at the same time, but they're approaching different stages in how they're being applied to the court, or different stages with written proceedings and the oral proceedings. I think one of the most important questions to ask is, why these countries are doing this. And I think from Vanuatu's perspective, one of the key, and many countries share this perspective, is the science is very clear on what we need to be doing, but the IPCC reports also demonstrate there's a huge gap between what states are actually doing and what is needed to bend the curve on the emissions we're putting out there. And we're nowhere near addressing this bend. We're still on an upward trajectory that almost looks exponential at times. So one of the tools that these countries are thinking about is requesting an advisory opinion that hopefully will lead to some policy changes with respect to this different fora. They have different capacities and competences. Inter-America Court of Human Rights has a regional scope, but has maybe broader international implications, as you could have seen with the Right to a Healthy Environment advisory opinion that Colombia brought in a few years back. That led to a resolution that I know Danielle is going to speak about. And then, the world is starting to grapple with this issue a bit more. With respect to ITLAWs, such an advisory opinion has not been requested before on issue as large as this. So we're very excited to see, ITLAWs weigh in on this. They are at a different phase where the written submissions were in June 15th, due in June 15th. 40 states and IGOs, intergovernmental organizations, have made submissions, including the European Union and the Africa Union. So it's one of the largest cases that ITLAWs has ever seen, and it shows the appetite that states have to engage in this fora and guide the court forward. With Inter-America Court, you see the deadline was extended to October 18th, and we know the oral proceedings will happen later. Coming back to ITLAWs, the oral proceedings will happen in September, so it's very likely that the ITLAWs advisory opinion will come first. And I think, having sat with these issues for a while, it's a positive thing, because some of the issues that the International Tribunal of Law of the Sea can weigh in on are more technical in nature. The legal implications of climate science, where we are with that ground, the ICJ is less, is more reluctant to tread on. And then with the Inter-America Court of Human Rights, this is a very strong court in terms of human rights jurisprudence in the region, but has implications more globally. So we expect the Inter-America Court of Human Rights advisory opinion to follow shortly after the ITLAWs advisory opinion. So these are 2 very progressive courts, and then we go on to the ICJ. The written submission deadline is October as well, but a few states have indicated that they would like to see an extension, so that might very well be the case. And then there's a second round in the ICJ process, as well as oral proceedings. So in the next, perhaps towards the first half of next year, we will have these deadlines coming to bear, and we hope by the time the ICJ has oral proceedings or the oral hearings, it can build on the jurisprudence of both the Inter-America Court of Human Rights and the International Tribunal of Law of the Sea, and sort of pull together the jurisprudence of these courts, but also weigh in more broadly on international law The ICJ, International Court of Justice, is seen as the world's court, the world's highest court, so it has quite a lot of power in creating and impacting states and how they approach addressing the climate crisis, and the fact that in coming to the ICJ, it was the General Assembly that made this request. So all 193 states of the UN coming together to make a request, I think, is quite powerful. We had 132 co-sponsors, and no
132.
132 co-sponsors. And I think this sort of will show to the court that this is a request by many states, so it will embolden the court in moving the needle. And then some things the ICJ can do that we are hopeful of is when it looks at states' obligations under international law, moving beyond just the Paris Agreement, moving just beyond the UNFCCC and touching on areas of law like human rights law. We think this is where the real value is, because as we all know, while the Paris Agreement and the UNFCCC have been very useful in moving the needle on climate action, there's something inherently, the fact that it is a negotiation process. You always achieve the lowest common denominator in moving forward with climate action. So we're hoping the court can nudge the COP processes a bit further and deliver something that benefits humanity. And this is one of the ways we're hoping to address, at least in part one, part of the triple planetary crisis. But yes, that's me. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your very aclaratory presentation. And in connection with that, Costa Rica was one of those 132 states of this international coalition. And as we have here a member of the embassy, the legal advisor, I would ask you, why and how can a human rights approach support the fight against climate change?
Thank you very much, Montserrat. Good morning, good afternoon to everyone. To our esteemed panelists here that I'm very pleased to meet or to salute again, old and new friends, but also to our distinguished audience who I hope will be engaging with us in a very horizontal exchange today. Let me say first that I am not the legal advisor. I'm the Minister-Counsellor at the mission of Costa Rica to the UN. But definitely what I wanted to stress in the first place, because I'm sharing here a space with Vanuatu, and Costa Rica was very honored to support in a very early stage Vanuatu's initiative. And we were very glad to be part of the core group of countries who spearheaded the resolution. But what I want to say in the first place is that I've read, I wouldn't be able to quote the author of this sentence, but I've read that small powers, when you think about the General Assembly of the United Nations and the composition, we discuss a lot about big powers in terms of nuclear, etc., but we don't discuss enough the role that small powers play in the international community. And one key sentence that that has got stuck in my mind is that small powers are not different from big powers in degree, but also in kind. And so I think that the experience that Vanuatu, but also my own country, Costa Rica, can share is of relevance. Let me say that Costa Rica, for those who might not be aware of our history, Costa Rica is a country of 5 million people located in Central America that for the last 3 decades at least decided with political will and with deliberate actions, decided to revert a deforestation process that was increasing in our country back in the 1970s. And with that reversal, we also started a process not only of reforestation that has now reached around 60% of the territory of our country, but also to protect the 6.5% of biodiversity of the planet that is calculated to be in Costa Rica. And so this is where I come from, this is the place I come from. Also as an unarmed country, a country that decided to abolish its armed forces, our first line of defense has been international law. This is the first line of defense of Costa Rica, and that as with other small and big states, Costa Rica has indeed put its hopes and its political will for the determination of its obligations and rights, including the Pacific, the peaceful resolution of conflicts, human rights, and peace. So this is just to put you in our situation. Definitely, the issue of climate change for us is of utmost importance, not only for our history, but also because we understand the challenge that it supposes for the whole of humanity. And the evidence is stark. Let me say that the IPCC, the latest report of the IPCC, has given us the last warning in the sense that the global emissions of CO2 during the period 2010-2019 have been the highest in any moment of history. And so the actions and the commitments that are being engaged by countries, as our colleague from Vanuatu says, remain at this stage inadequate to reach the climate objectives that would help us avoid a catastrophe, which is an increase in the temperature of less than 2% by the end of the century. Paradoxically, the countries who are most vulnerable to climate change, including ours, Vanuatu and Costa Rica, are the countries who are mostly intensifying their efforts in terms of adaptation and mitigation, while the major emitters of carbon and the responsible for this climate catastrophe continue reproducing a status quo that is scientifically, we know, unsustainable. However, since you bring back the question of human rights, Montserrat, we know that just as the triple environmental crisis composed of pollution, biodiversity loss, and climate change affects us all, we are all affected by climate change. This triple environmental crisis affects not only the most vulnerable states, but also the most vulnerable people. And so this evidence proves that climate change does not affect us all in the same way. For instance, let me give you one fact, which is the 20th multimillionaire, the richest 20th multimillionaire in the world, generate 8,000 times more pollution in terms of carbon emissions than the 1,000 million people that are the poorest together. 20 people. At the same time, 13 people die every minute by pollution of air. 90% of the children of the world is exposed to air pollution. Climate change, as you mentioned, is forcing the displacement of at least 20 people per year. And we know the impacts of climate change are threatening the cultural identity of our societies, including indigenous peoples, but also the very right of self-determination when we think about, for instance, states that might be gone due to sea level rise. So definitely the climate crisis is undoubtedly the biggest threat to the enjoyment and the realization of all human rights, whether health, food, water, or adequate housing. In this sense, we understand that the international community has a lot to do to overcome these challenges, and without international cooperation and an international commitment to address this issue, we will not be able to address this issue. But this is where human rights play a key role, because the human rights lens gives us the opportunity to look precisely at this specificity, at the vulnerability not only of states in terms of principles of equity, but also looking at the most vulnerable people who are being affected by this crisis. With that background, let me say that last year we commemorated the 50th anniversary of the Stockholm Declaration. The Stockholm Declaration, an action plan for the human environment, whereby the international community established for the first time the common conviction that the human being has a fundamental right to an environment of quality, and I quote, an environment of quality that permits a life of dignity and well-being. I end the quote. Since then, this right has gone, the human right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment that has been referred here, has gone through a process of developments, both at the national and regional levels, which has seen the recognition of some form of this right by a vast majority of states, not only in their constitutions, but also in legislation, as well as its establishment in regional human rights instruments worldwide. Over the last 20 years, the consensus to establish the right to a healthy environment has been growing ever stronger. Our countries, as a matter of fact, together with Morocco, Slovenia, Switzerland, and the Maldives, initiated a process back in 2011 at the Human Rights Council in Geneva to study the relationship between human rights and the environment. This process led, among other outcomes, to the creation of the mandate of a special rapporteur on the issue of human rights obligations related to the enjoyment of a clean, healthy, safe, and sustainable environment, progressively clarifying how a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment is integral to the full enjoyment of human rights. After this process, our countries initiated first a process of negotiation of a resolution to proclaim the human right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment in Geneva, resolution that was adopted in 2022. Last year we brought the resolution with some tweaks to the resolution in comparison to the Geneva text. We brought this resolution before the General Assembly. In July of last year, this resolution was adopted by a majority of 161 states in favor, none against, and 117 co-sponsors. So a bit less than the record set by Vanuatu, but certainly a landmark resolution that builds on the progress made, on the development made both at the national, regional, international levels, but also building on the legacy of some particular environmental instruments, such as the Paris Agreement, which in its preamble includes a reference to the promotion and protection of human rights. This human right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment is a crystallizer of the developments, but also the right that brings together environmental principles, and the resolution that proclaims this right refers to multilateral environmental agreements, but also the human rights component, which is crucial to address basically the human needs. I guess that we need to make peace with nature, as the title of this roundtable says, but to be able to do so, we also need to make peace with ourselves. And this is what human rights framework brings to the discussion. I will end here for the next question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Yeah, it's very fascinating to see the interactions and the interplay between different matters beyond the extraterritorial effects of everything concerning climate change, but also between human rights and climate change, and also between climate change and asylum, for example, and regarding time as well, because the rights of future generations are at the core of this topic. And now they turn to the civil society. And Victor Tafur, as the ICEL's representative before the United Nations, knows very well these processes. Victor, could you talk about the advisory processes before the International Court of Justice and the Inter-American Court of Human Rights from the perspective of civil society?
Well, thank you, Montserrat. Thank you, my colleagues in the panel, and I just will jump right on the topic, because after Kevin and Danielle's, I can just fly with this momentous event and unfoldings that are happening, because even before I plug in how civil society can contribute, you see, what is the key struggle is that essentially international law has been more about states, right? Human rights focus on the individual, and for 50 years we've been waiting for the recognition of a human right to a healthy environment from the UN highest body, which now happened, and also for many years we've been expecting more of the court. And of course, it's come back from very specific cases, and there's a wealth of customary law, of international law. But how do we put it all together and now make it something that delivers to the realities of the displaced people, or people who are making the transition, and the future that is expected from us, those future generations that are now in the focus. So to answer that, I think we need to understand that civil society can contribute to marry those things, because the courts, the International Court of Justice, will be addressing the usual principles of cooperation, prevention. Now there is a clear recognition of the right to have an environmental impact statement. It's been confirmed in a case in Uruguay and Argentina, also Costa Rica versus Nicaragua, and when you use the word customary international law, which is the highest recognition that it is a kind of a legal implication to do so, and the states are doing it. There's a lot of that. But the advisory opinion is going to fill that context in climate change. So that's the relevance. And then it will combine that and embed it with human rights. So the moment of having these two processes coming, one just behind the other, is just tremendous, and because it's what happens next that matters. It's how you really give significance to the resolution on the right to a healthy environment through an advisory opinion, which I think what's fascinating from the beginning is that it's not an adversarial situation. So while you won't be focusing on a specific situation, the court has a more ability to tie the various concepts, the various principles I mentioned. And something that's very interesting from the advisory opinion is that it asks about how to protect the climate. And if you go to the IPCC report, climate is defined by the biosphere and all the elements that sustain life. So the answer is very, very powerful. While the court is not going to look at the science and deliver us, it's great that the other court is looking at it first, and they will have to rely on it in any case. And then the International Court of Human Rights is going to look at it from the angle of human rights, but because of the precedence of the court, they will look at the other treaties. So it's kind of a circle of benefiting the process. And then civil society, of course, has to be plugged in, because academics, NGOs cannot participate in the ICJ process, but they can influence their countries to do so. And that's essential. I have a good example here, right sitting here in the New York City bar. At some point, when the process was going at the UN, they sent a resolution from the lawyers around the world, from this association, to support that process. Those small contributions help. So whichever place, bar association or membership or company you're working for, everything counts on support, because countries, judges, they all need reassurances that they are making this progressive development, which sometimes is complicated to move forward, but that's what we need. So putting it all together, I think it's a very important moment, and I invite, in whatever position you are, to try to help these efforts going on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Victor. And now let's move to the enterprises, the corporations, which are crucial for stimulating the economic development and to generate rich wealth for society. Nevertheless, they also can be damaging actors sometimes for society, for human rights, and for environment. And the researchers on international law usually speak about their traditional invisibility before it is difficult sometimes to reach them from national frameworks. However, things are changing in the last years and transcending the simply voluntary frameworks made in the realm of OECD or United Nations, or also the International Labour Organization. One of the key questions is the due diligence regarding enterprises and their affiliates or their subsidiaries in the supply chain. And it is necessary to take into account that there are many different kinds of corporations, and each of them, textile sector, extractive enterprises, transports, communications, have different standards. Regarding aviation, Teresa, which one are, according to your view, the main challenges in the face of sustainability?
Thank you, Montserrat, and thank you for the kind invitation. It's a pleasure to be here and share this table, this panel with you. So I would say, and I would refer to my colleagues here, that I think the challenge for aviation, which is it's big, it's very big, but as any activity, any human activity, is to reach net zero emissions in the year 2050, as the United Nations and the international treaties and regulation in the European Union, for example, has stated that is necessary to avoid the most dangerous effects of climate change. And another great challenge would be to communicate and engage with our stakeholders, and mainly and very importantly with society in general and the governments, because the governments might, with the regulation, might help us through that transition, and society are our clients, so they have to understand the efforts that we're doing. So having said this, why is such a challenge, or why is so special about aviation? The problem with aviation is that it's a very hard to abate sector, because the technology that is necessary to abate the emissions or avoid emissions or reduce the emissions of aviation is still under development. So that's why currently, even though currently aviation represents around 2 or 3% of total global emissions. In the future, when many other sectors will be electrified using renewable energies, for us will be different, and we will represent around 20% of total emissions. So we understand as a sector that we need to act, and that we need to act in a bold way and as fast as possible. For that, there are 3 things that we can do at the moment, and this is the put a lot of investment into renewable of the fleet. So each time you put into your fleet one new aircraft, you can reduce or be more efficient in 30%, depending on the type of the engine or of the aircraft. Also, there are a lot of measures that you can do to have more efficient operations as well, with digitalization of the processes, reducing the weight in the flights, and many other things. And very important, and this is again to the use of new technology, the use of the so-called sustainable aviation fuels. These are the key to a more sustainable aviation right now, and it's possible to reduce up to 90%, between 60 and 90% of emissions in terms of life cycle, the emissions from aviation. The problem is that currently there's around 0.1% of the needed sustainable aviation fuels in the market. So there's not enough, and we need to increase the production, so reduce the price of SAF, that's called the SAF, in order to be able to use it in a more in a faster path and pace, and use it as much as we want. But this means that more sustainable aviation is possible today. And another thing that is a challenge for us, as I said, is to communicate with the stakeholders and explain to them the effort that we're doing, the interest of, at least in Europe, the aviation is very much interested in doing this as fast as and more effective as possible. I have to say that there's a very strict regulation that is just about to be in place. And of course, this is going to affect us directly, but we are going even beyond that. When I say we, I mean the IAG group, where IBERIA belongs to. So we were the first group of airlines in the world to commit to the net zero emissions target in 2050. So it's something that we have to do. It's our own fault, or it's our own challenge, that we need to explain in an easier way that makes so that to reach society, make them understand the effort and the difficulties that we are going through, but the interest of the sector to reduce our emissions. So traditionally, the sector has avoided this conversation, I think, and that's our fault. It's in our side, and now we are trying to remedy that and improve the conversation.
Through the power of narrative.
The power of narrative, that's right. And also that's alliances, being big and small power, I guess. So each one in its own responsibilities, I guess. But everyone needs to put a little effort into this.
Very interesting. Thank you very much, Teresa. And now the energy. Which is an essential value, almost like water, for human survival. And according to a recent report by the World Bank and the World Health Organization, around 675 million people in the world do not have access to the electric energy yet. So I would ask Mr. Mahoney about the challenges to build renewable energy in a way that is sustainable and doesn't continue the unequal burden of energy production and transportation.
Well, thank you very much, Montserrat, and thank you, esteemed panelists. It's been fascinating to listen. It's a privilege to be so close to people who are involved in really the existential issue of our day and our children and grandchildren, and to see the efforts that you may say small players, but you're mighty players on the world stage right now. So, thank you. At Avangrid, we're a U.S.-based energy company. We're one of the leading sustainable companies in the U.S. We've already really made a transition as a company to all renewables. So our company is made up of network utilities in the states of Maine, Connecticut, New York, and Massachusetts that have no fossil generation. And then the other half of our business is renewables. We're one of the leading renewable companies in the U.S. With solar and wind projects. We're now building the first large-scale offshore wind project off the coast of Massachusetts. We're really excited about the opportunities for development there. We also have made a real commitment to environmental, social, and governmental goals. We feel that that's the way to develop a sustainable economy and a sustainable communities, and support the UN Sustainable Development Goals. We are a listed company here in the U.S., but we're part of the Iberdrola Group, which is one of the world's, I think they have the world's largest fleet of renewable assets. And so we benefit from being part of a group that has shown real leadership in making, they were the first energy company to make a bold transition to renewable energy on a large scale. We benefit from the best practices that the group identifies in countries like Brazil, the United Kingdom, US, Spain, France, Italy, Ireland, and now looking to expand activities in Africa and sub-Sahara nations in addressing issues of energy poverty and renewable resources. At Avangrid, with our profile, we have the lowest carbon footprint of any U.S. utility, and we've made the strongest pledge towards carbon neutrality, pledging to be carbon neutral for Scope 1 and 2 by 2030. We call this process that we're in not just an energy transition, but a just transition. And by that we mean that not only do we need to invest in renewable resources, but we also, as we do that, we need to act as stewards of the natural environment. Because even renewable resources, renewable energy projects, and networks have an impact on the environment. The other area that they have a significant impact is on peoples and communities. So we've made a focus on environmental justice, and we've tried to match our efforts in considering the environmental impacts with the social impacts. Because for far too long, a disproportionate peoples have borne the burdens of energy production and transportation. You see that, where power plants are located. You see that where transmission lines are located. You see that where waste disposal is placed. And we think that that's gone on for far too long, and that a process needs to be developed to take those factors into consideration in serious consultation prior to making these massive investments. Because the scale of investments that will be made, over the next 20 to 30 years that are necessary as we transition to a cleaner energy and a cleaner environment is massive on really an unparalleled scale. And how those investments are made in consultation and in consideration of people that have traditionally borne the burdens of those, I think is really going to be one of the one of the critical questions to solve, and will really distinguish governments, communities, and companies as being thoughtful and responsible, and those that aren't. So.
Thank you very much, Scott. Well, we have ended this first round of questions, and we could move to a second round, briefer questions. After seeing the requests for advisory opinions to different international tribunals, do you think, Kevin, if I may, if there could be other tools which could be used to support this same endeavor regarding the clarification of the state's obligations regarding climate change?
Yes, there are definitely other tools and innovations. Well, one of the most important things is with advisory opinions, you have to guide the process. States have to make interventions, in the terms of Inter-America Court and ITLOS. NGOs as well who can participate can guide the process of the court. So I think that aspect is very important, and there's always the risk of a negative advisory opinion, so we need robust engagement to guide the courts in the right direction.
We hope not.
But having said that, I'll touch on two other areas of innovations in international law that Vanuatu is a big proponent of. One is the development of a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty. So Vanuatu and Tuvalu, two very vulnerable island countries in the Pacific, we contribute the least to emissions, and we are probably one of the most vulnerable countries because of sea level rise, the geography of the countries. So one of these tools, like the fossil fuel non-proliferation, which should help Avangrid because it will help move countries away from relying on fossil fuels, is to begin developing a new treaty that focuses on rapidly decarbonizing economies and the just transition away from fossil fuels. And I think this is important because in the UNFCCC, the Paris Agreement, in the Paris Agreement, there's no mention of fossil fuels. It was very clearly left out on purpose by big, powerful states with huge fossil interests. So we need a tool, a treaty, to effectively guide how we decarbonize, and it needs to be something that's robust. And when we have all members, of the UN, all states in the world working together on this, I think that's when we can truly move away, because you'll always have the bad actors that want to continue using fossil fuels while others start decarbonizing. So that's one aspect. The other is amending the Rome statutes, so international criminal law, to include ecocide as a new crime. And this is a useful tool because if you see the war in Ukraine, the bombing of Ukrainian territory leads to the destruction of biodiversity, forest, the environment. So these types of things should become a crime under international law, and there's active momentum in this field. Vanuatu is one of the proponents again, but recently the European Union looked at it positively, and a few.
Council of Europe.
Yes, indeed. So there's growing momentum to start, acknowledging this, but obviously amending the Rome Statute is fraught with its own political dynamics. So it's still a ways away, but that's one of the other tools we're pursuing actively, and we hope in the near future you'll see something along that line. And it's important because ecocide, the way it's defined currently, the draft definition put forward, can even prevent the opening of mines, because if you're going to destroy large swaths of rainforest, that could be a crime under international law if ecocide is included as one of the new crimes under the Rome Statute. But those are other tools. Vanuatu believes there's no silver bullet to environmental problems. We need to use the whole suite of tools under international law to address this triple planetary crisis. So, that's our input.
It's true. Thank you very much. And Daniel, what is the contribution of the recent proclamation of the human right to a healthy and sustainable environment? by the United Nations General Assembly to nature and the people, what are the next steps?
Thank you. So first, as I tried to convey in my first presentation, this is the universal recognition of this right does not come out of a vacuum. It builds on what the national developments, national regional developments. I mentioned in my first intervention that the right has been recognized in one way or another by more than 150 states in the world. And I have to say that even in states such as the United States, where the right has not been recognized at a federal level, there are states, individual states such as New York State, who has recognized a right to a clean environment, a healthy environment. So this is the universal recognition has built on these developments. We know that General Assembly resolutions are not binding; they are not binding in nature. But the universal recognition of a human right such as this one provides a framework and a bar of environmental quality for all members of society. One example of these effects has been the recognition of the right to water and sanitation, which took place in the General Assembly in 2010, and which, for instance, generated important changes in the development of policies and internal legislation in favor of this recognition. For Costa Rica, for example, included the right to water in its constitution in 2020, so 10 years after its universal recognition by the General Assembly. I believe that now that the right has been recognized universally, there are legal but also practical avenues. Let me touch upon first the practical avenues. There is a need to implement this right at the national level with the support of course, the leadership of states, but the support of all actors of society. And this is precisely one key issue that I hear in the interventions of my fellow colleagues, how all members of society, through a whole of society approach, can contribute through a bar of well-being and quality for all people. And so there is a need to implement this right. The UN is actually bringing this right programmatically to its agencies and funds its programs. So there is a way to go in that respect. But in terms of the legal avenues, we were very, very lucky, I have to say, that a few months after the recognition of the right at the General Assembly, Vanuatu, together with others, came with this powerful initiative to request an advisory opinion to the international, the ICJ, the Court of Justice. So we feel that we are of the view that now that not only this this request has been adopted by the GA, but also the resolution of request includes a human rights component, namely the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the International Covenant on Civil, Political, but also the Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, and the Right to Healthy Environment resolution. This request to the ICJ and the potential of the ICJ with this request is to clarify what happens first to establish a common language that could facilitate compromises, more ambitious commitments and compromises by states in future climate negotiations. But also the ICJ has the possibility, unique opportunity, to look at the climate change, at this crisis, through a human rights lens, through the experience of those who are most vulnerable and most affected by this by climate change, and of course clarify the obligations in terms of the states. So, for instance, there was a head of state of an island Pacific country, I think it was Palau, if I'm not mistaken, which once came to the General Assembly to say, to predict, if I can say, the death of a state due to sea level rise. And so the ICJ has a unique opportunity to provide the obligations that are required to avoid this situation to happen, to prevent these situations, and to address particularly the vulnerability of these countries, but also of the people, not only in these countries, but all over the world, including in developed countries where we see climate change is already affected. So more has to be done, but the potential and the avenues are there, and certainly with the commitment and the involvement of all actors, we will have hope for the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We are disentangling the content and the implications, possible implications of all these advisory opinions requested to different international tribunals, in particular to the International Court of Justice and the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. And so, Victor, do you think that these advisory proceedings could contribute to making peace with nature and making nature a key for peace?
Yes, thank you, Montse, for the question. And I'm actually going to reply not with a natural context, but with more of a youth context, the future. I think there's a common element between the two, is the reference to the future generations. And I think that's where the answer lies, because while we all have our connections with nature, I think the present youth and what we connect with the future envisions that, and that's probably, without getting away into more ethics or other, the reason why where we belong. The reason why the UN exists is, and it's built on cooperation, right? And it's actually in the UN Charter that we want to avoid next generation the scourge of war, and that's the motive. And interestingly, in both processes, the youth and the future generations will be the ones, I think, guiding and pulling this, even with the help of the companies, because you need to have those. You were also thinking about those stakeholders in the future. When this all started, and many years ago, it was led by a few people, but the youth took over, and then they pushed governments. And we remember walking with Teresa, Parejo in the climate march. It was 2017 or 18. One of those young fellows marching with us then joined that group, and he became a leader. Yes, Salomon, you hadn't realized that, for example. But it was that kind of leadership, right? And then we see companies doing the right thing. So I think this future link is the one that's going to carry it, and I think the UN is thinking about that, and that's kind of what leverages, right, the powers, as you were mentioning, smaller powers, because people do matter at the UN, ideas do matter, and I think this idea of passing the torch on to the future generation is the one that's kind of carrying us all in this moment.
Thank you very much. Let's move again to the corporations and their role.
Sitting on the wrong side.
You are in the middle. And the role in society regarding climate change. Teresa, tell us, do you think that society understands the value of aviation in the current context, with all the challenges we face, particularly climate change?
That's a complex question. Thank you, Montserrat. I think that they understand. I do think so. It was very clear during the pandemic. That was really a big moment to really truly understand the importance of aviation. In fact, during that moment, and I'm just talking about Iberia in this moment, we did many flights, bringing back people that were stranded away in different countries. More than 70 flights we did to repatriate people to bring them back to Spain. And we've done many other flights, and the use of the aviation and the cargo within the aviation for humanitarian reasons as well, during the pandemic and during catastrophes as well. And we also contribute to the need of organs, transplants for people that need them. And so we've contributed a lot. And I think that's something, and among other many things.
And animals in extinction, right?
Yeah, yes, that's right. But among many other things. But so I do think that people understand that aviation is key, and in Spain is especially important because not only because Spain is like an island in Europe, and we need to connect our territory to Europe and to other countries in the world, but also because we have islands and we need to connect, and that's even a right in our country, logically. But also because 80% of tourists come to Spain by plane, and the tourism sector represents in Spain more than 12% of the GDP. So it's critical, and people understand that. But what I'm not very much sure about, and that's on us that we have to explain, as I previously said, is that sustainability comes with costs. And so people, when you ask, we do surveys to our clients, and they say, oh yes, we are committed to sustainability, but then that comes with a cost. And I'm not sure that society that has been flying, at least in Europe, with small prices, are ready now to do this step, come forward and understand that this is a big change. And so again, this goes back to my previous, what I just said, that we need to collaborate with our stakeholders. We need to communicate. We need to explain our stakeholders and society the importance of aviation. We've done different reports explaining this social impact of our activity, and in fact, so big that in Spain, our activity, just Iberia activity, represents 0.6% of the Spanish GDP and 0.9% of the employment in our country, which is huge. And so, but we needed to put this in numbers in order to communicate and to explain to society. But we're working on more on that, how much our activity contributes in the routes, but because the social impact is not just in Spain, but also in the countries that we fly to, for example, Costa Rica. And so if there was no aviation, then not only it would affect us, but it would affect those countries that need the tourists to arrive. But we need to do this in a more sustainable way. That's the key, but not avoid aviation, I guess.
Huge challenge.
Big challenges.
Thank you. And Scott, how can environmental justice be applied to the challenges of climate change and energy?
That's an excellent question. Thank you. Here in the U.S., in our courts, in our agencies, we've thought of environmental justice now for really probably since the early '80s, with the passage of the National Environmental Protection Act. But I think that now the definition needs to be further expanded. So when we think of it, again, we think of it in terms of what are the principles of a just transition. So we think in addition to traditional environmental justice, we think you also need to consider climate justice, which is really the remediations of the impact that climate change is having. And as investments are made to address that, taking that into consideration. We think it includes energy justice, which Montserrat, you mentioned earlier. Far too many people don't have access to affordable, clean energy, and addressing that, I think, is also equally important. And then last, again, the issues of environmental justice, where the burdens have for far too long been borne by people of color, people in poverty, people without power, and that needs to be addressed. So considering those, we like to think of it again as part of a just transition approach. And so as we approach our activities, we have that in mindset. And not only do we have it in mindset and try to engage with stakeholders on those discussions, but we have a responsibility to bring this into the conversation, to bring this into the education. So for example, there are programs that provide stakeholders with training on how to engage in the regulatory, governmental, and investment process. Because you can't expect that they come to the table with the same tools and skills that people that have been participating, in these discussions and making these decisions have had. So you need to somehow make it a level playing field, and I think we all have a responsibility to do that.
Thank you very much. Well, I think that time is almost over. Yeah, just 3 minutes left of the 90 minutes. We have had excellent speakers, and I think that also wonderful topics. And if anybody in the audience would like to pose a question, please, is the opportunity. If not,
In 3 minutes.
well, we could end here this panel. Thank you very much to all of you, organizers, audience, and speakers. Thank you.